những bài học, kinh nghiệm quý báu giúp các bạn trẻ trong những thử thách và lựa chọn. Thì hôm nay chúng ta có một khách mời rất đặc biệt, được mệnh danh là phù thủy khởi nghiệp. Người này đã từng sáng lập 3 công ty khởi nghiệp và tất cả công ty đều thành công và được exit. Và với một trong những công ty đó, anh đã thành lập thị trường thế chấp trên Internet với nguồn vốn huy động hơn 38 triệu đô, là nguồn vốn tư nhân lớn nhất ở Nam California cuối thập niên 90. Và gần nhất, anh đã thành lập công ty Propsy, là công ty chuyên về PropTech giúp chuẩn hóa quy trình giao dịch bất động sản tại Việt Nam. Tính đến năm 2020, anh đã gọi vốn thành công 37 triệu đô đầu tư vào Propsy. Công ty sở hữu 30 trung tâm giao dịch tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, cùng với đội ngũ nhân sự gần 700 người. Các bạn hãy cùng Linh chào đón khách mời của chúng ta hôm nay là anh John Lê, CEO của công ty Propsy.
Hello, John. How are you? Thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Lynn.
So I've known you for quite a few years now, and through all that time, been very impressed by your entrepreneurial spirit, by all that you're able to have accomplished over the past 10 plus years. So very happy to have you on the phone on the program today to talk to everybody about those experiences, and hopefully people can learn something during our time together.
Absolutely, I'm happy to share.
Awesome. So let's start off with just a little bit about your background so that everybody can, hear the steps and some of the key areas that you went through to get to where you are in your career today.
Absolutely. So I started my career way back when. So maybe 1993. Some of your audience may have just been born during that period. So that's when I graduated from the University of California. UCLA was the actual campus that most people know it by. And so the early start of my career was pretty much in the investment banking area. I was very fortunate enough to kind of jump onto the tailwinds that what later became the structured finance market for mortgage-backed securities and asset-backed securities. And I was able to do that very early on for several years with JP Morgan. And ultimately, through that experience, I realized how inefficient the financial marketplace was from Wall Street to Main Street. And as a result of which, the entrepreneurial bug inside of me just kind of was itching to get out. So ultimately, I ended up starting a marketplace for loans on the residential mortgage side. And it became the first online mortgage marketplace, connecting tens of thousands of brokers nationwide to several hundred banks in the US marketplace. And then ultimately, I ended up exiting from that business and sold it to a group called Fidelity. So it's just a big publicly held fintech company. But even though I found myself in early retirement at the tender age of 31, 31, is that I found out there was still some unresolved issues and opportunities in the marketplace when it came to fintech solutions. So I dove back in again in 2002 and set up an enterprise banking software company that ultimately was too successful in terms of the solution that it was providing. And what happened subsequently was that too many banks ended up adopting the solution, which is a positive thing. But they used the solution in such a way that ushered in the global financial crisis by providing too much liquidity to consumers on the residential mortgage side. And so that kind of pretty much led to my second startup company back in 2007 when I exited from that business too. Long story short, I found an opportunity to come back to Vietnam in 2009. Ended up investing in establishing Vietnam's first consumer private credit bureau in conjunction with my fellow stakeholder TransUnion, which was one of the top global 3 credit bureau operators here. Ultimately, I exited from that business and got bored again, quite honestly. Too much energy, and ended up starting Propsy.
Well, that is quite an adventure. I am so enamored now, even more so than I was before. So let me talk a little bit about you with our audience in case some people missed it. Thì các bạn ơi, Linh rất là ấn tượng với anh John ở đây. Thì anh John vừa mới mô tả những năm khi còn trẻ của anh John. Nói chung là anh đã bắt đầu làm việc ở một ngân hàng, rồi sau đó anh nhận được một cái vấn đề trong thị trường, rồi sau đó đã khởi nghiệp và ở độ 31 tuổi đã bán được công ty khởi nghiệp đó và có thể về hưu sớm. Thì với các bạn mà đang muốn về hưu sớm, ở đây là một cái gương mẫu mà các bạn có thể xem tới. Rồi sau đó dù bạn có thể về hưu như anh John không thể ngồi ở không, thì đã khởi nghiệp thêm 2 lần nữa và sau 2 lần đó cũng đã bán 2 công ty đó và bây giờ vô công ty thứ tư. Thì cực kỳ ấn tượng với lịch sử của anh John. Thì cho Linh hỏi trước khi chúng ta đi tiếp theo nữa đó, thì các bạn chúng ta hãy trò chuyện chút ha. Các bạn cho Linh biết là khi mình gọi vốn, các nhà sáng lập nên chuẩn bị điều gì? Thì anh John đã gọi vốn nhiều lần rồi, thì chúng ta hãy xem thử là các bạn nghĩ như thế nào nha. Các bạn nghĩ là mình nên A, chuẩn bị tốt sản phẩm và kế hoạch chi tiết. Mình nên B, tìm hiểu những cái kỹ năng về nhà đầu tư và thị trường. Và hoặc là C, mình nên xác định giai đoạn gọi vốn. Hay là D, tất cả các cái ý kiến trên, hoặc là E, những cái ý kiến khác. Các bạn nghĩ như thế nào? Tại vì khi mình gọi vốn là mình sẽ có nhiều cái yếu tố mình cần phải trình bày, mình cần phải chia sẻ và mình cũng phải nghiên cứu trước. Thì với nhiều thứ cái món này đó, mình có nên làm cái việc nào trước, việc nào sau? Các bạn nghĩ như thế nào đây? Để coi. Thì thì dĩ nhiên mọi người sau khi Linh nói cái việc đó thì mọi người cũng sẽ chọn D là tất cả ý kiến trên, phải không? Thì đúng là mình phải làm tất cả, nhưng cái nào là đi trước, cái nào đi sau, phải không? Có một bạn nói là B, tìm hiểu kỹ năng. Ok, cũng được, là mình bắt đầu với bản thân trước, phải không? Ok, thì nói chung là mình sẽ có rất nhiều cái yếu tố. Thì Linh nghĩ là một người chuyên gia mà mình có thể hỏi là anh John đây. Thì chúng ta trở lại anh John nha. All right. So the audience is really excited. We were just talking about fundraising because this is something that you definitely have a lot of experience with. And with Propsy, you raised over $37 million. That's a lot of money, especially for Vietnam. So, you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and maybe if you can give some tips. We have a lot of young entrepreneurs on the show or watching the show today. And, you know, if you could give some tips on, if you're an entrepreneur and you really want to start this business and you think that you probably need to fundraise, what should you prepare? How do you prepare for these conversations and actually successfully raise money for your business?
Sure. So I think the first question that you really need to do is some introspection. It's very important. And, you know, for me, just to kind of share a little bit with the audience, my first 2 companies, the first one, I raised a gob of money, very early age, was very resourceful, had a great network. So raising money actually came very easy for me because of my experience and my network. And I chose to go down that path. For my second company, it was a very different set of circumstances. I had to look and say, you know, do I want outside external investors at this point in time? You know, what were the pros and what were the cons of the business? And so as a result of which, I determined with my second company, I'm just going to self-finance it. And that also ended up in a very successful outcome for myself personally and financially. With regards to Propsy, with regards to your question for young entrepreneurs in Vietnam, you know, you have to ask yourself, you know, where are you at? What do you want to achieve? Is this a lifestyle business or is this a real commercial opportunity that you can scale, right? You know, opening up a coffee shop, for example, for your friends and whatnot, you know, maybe you're not going to go out and get VC funding. But if you got a true commercial platform or true commercial application, and it does have the opportunity to solve for significant problems or opportunities in the marketplace, then certainly there may be a situation where you want to go out and raise money. But at the same time, that's not for everyone.
So it seems like the first step is make sure you have a really solid product, right?
It's not really a solid product. It's more of an introspection, meaning, you know, where are you solid with this? Do you want to raise money, right? You have to answer that question first and foremost. You may think you need to raise money, but do you want to raise money? I'm sorry, you may want to raise money, but do you really need to raise money? And so that introspection helps you determine the course of life in terms of your startup organization. Secondly, is it actually a fundable venture, right? Is it a commercial business or is it a lifestyle business? And so we need to make that determination also.
Actually, can we go into that a little? Because it seems like, depending on who you talk to, the word lifestyle business can be a bad term, right? Especially if you speak to people in Silicon Valley, lifestyle business, not so good, right? So yeah, can you explain the difference between a fundable business versus a lifestyle business? And how can a young person go about thinking what type of business they have and why they should pick one or the other?
Absolutely. So I may have a passion for, you know, for making model planes and trains, right? And as a result of which, I think that this hobby or this passion of mine may work for a lot of other folks. I open up a store or a chain of stores. And these stores are selling locally to children, adults, whatever it may be. They just all happen to share a passion. And so when you ask yourself, is this a commercial opportunity that's fundable? It is, but probably more by your local bank, right, with a loan. It's not commercially fundable from a venture capital standpoint because it's not the type of investment that shows scale of return, right? Investors and VCs tend to look for a return the fund type of opportunity. And when it comes to that kind of a lifestyle, yes, it makes money. Yes, it affords you a lifestyle of doing whatever it is that you want, but it's not an investable type of business. And so the alternative to that is maybe going out and working with a local bank, getting a small loan, and then operating your business that way.
So I would say, if you can clarify, an investable business is one that can grow from zero to be the next billion-dollar company, right? So you have to see if there's a large enough market, if there are enough customers. Is that kind of the way to look at it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it depends on the stage of your fundraising. So if we're here assuming that it's a first-time entrepreneur, it's a young startup company, maybe it's got a proof of product, or it's already been commercialized for years, showing some trickling of revenue, then absolutely, you go out there and you raise that seed round, you raise that pre-A round, they call it these days. And the reality of that situation is when those investors come in, they will also work with you to see how big is the market, because it has to grow. And then who are the subsequent investors that will come in and fund this opportunity beyond your initial set of investors? And so if the size of the market isn't there, then that means you're not going to be able to get subsequent funding. And without the subsequent funding, you're pretty much dead in your tracks. And so as a result, it basically defines if this is an investable business or not. And from my standpoint, an investable business, from a professional investing standpoint, if it can't get beyond like a seed round or a pre-A round, then pretty much you shouldn't go out and get venture funding.
Okay. So just because you need money doesn't mean that the business is investable, right? Because it seems like a lot of young people, they come in thinking, oh, I don't have money, so let me just raise money. So you probably need a little bit more.
They call that the triple F, right? Friends, families, and fools. And so they'll be your initial set of investors, and they're always going to be there because they're emotionally attached to you, right? It's not a financial decision, but when it comes to institutional or financial investors, then there are very clear market sizing opportunities that they have to look at, and then what's going to be the return on that investment for them relative to the risk.
Okay, all right. So I think that makes a lot of sense. A person with your level of experience starts really macro and starts looking at the overall opportunity. I wonder what is that next step? Let's say with Propzy, right? You identified real estate. That's a really big macro interest in Vietnam. What are some of the, what's the next step underneath? How do you come up with which segment within real estate or which product within real estate? How did that evolution happen?
Yeah. So, typically, just kind of looking from the outside in, is that typically from an investor standpoint, if the team that you're looking at investing, or the company that you're investing in, the leadership, the founders, if they've got domain expertise when it comes to a particular vertical, in this case, Propzy in real estate, then that adds to a lot of, brownie points, right? In terms of, wow, this company, team, they understand the domain, they've got that experience. So there's a lot more credibility to what it is that they're offering up as a solution to some kind of a market problem within real estate. When we looked at it at Propzy, we looked specifically within the real estate sector and said, okay, is it commercial or is it residential? Within residential, is it new home markets or is it existing home markets? And so where is this, they call it the value proposition? Where's the real problem that we can solve? And so for Propzy, we determined that was the existing home resale market. It's a massive market. It's plagued with problems. There is no good, solid service provider. And so therefore, as a platform, there's something that we can actually latch onto and significantly impact from a consumer experience standpoint. And so that's what we've been doing for 5 years now.
Well, okay. So you dug down pretty deeply, right? So you understand on a broad macro level, real estate is interesting. But then within that, there's so many more layers. So it's not, so you really need to, as an entrepreneur, you really need to know what is that one small area that you can become an expert at. Is that kind of the key message? I
become an expert at, or you are an expert at it. And so it helps to establish credibility for your institutional investors. Now, that's different than saying, I built the next messaging app, right? So that's I would call that, wonderful, amazing luck, right? It's product market fit. These young folks are iterating around the solution and it starts to take root. But when you're going after a more of a vertical industry type of solution, then clearly, the ones that are most successful, if you look at the vintages, are the ones that come with folks that have some kind of call it sufficiency of knowledge and experience that says, I see what's going on, and I also see what's broken, and I'm willing to innovate around the solution, versus guys that are maybe 20-year industry veterans who are just kind of stuck in the traditional way of doing things, and their mindset is pretty much hard set in cement, right? So it's experience and knowledge within a domain to a certain limit, and I think those that kind of straddle it well with just enough to do the damage are the ones that are going to be the disruptors.
Okay, so super interesting. So let me turn this back to the audience a little bit. Các bạn ơi, thì anh John vừa mới chia sẻ những cái yếu tố mà bạn cần phải suy nghĩ tới khi mình muốn gọi vốn, và cũng rất là thú vị. Thì anh John đã mô tả là có hai bước đi ha. Trước tiên là bạn phải bắt đầu từ một cái quy mô rất là to, nghĩa là mình suy nghĩ về thị trường. Thị trường của mình nó đang có những cái tiềm năng như thế nào, khách hàng mục tiêu của mình, cái nhóm khách hàng mục tiêu nó có đủ lớn để cho nhà đầu tư quan tâm tới không. Tại vì với công ty mà mình muốn gọi vốn từ một nhà đầu tư tổ chức á, là cái quy mô nó phải đủ lớn, bởi vì nhà đầu tư sẽ luôn muốn tìm công ty kỳ lân kế tiếp, phải không? Thì nhưng nó hoàn toàn ok nếu mà bạn có một cái công ty mà nó có thể phát sinh lợi nhuận thường xuyên, và mình có thể dùng cái lợi nhuận đó để mình có thể sống một cuộc sống rất là thoải mái, hoặc là mình có thể dùng vốn đó để đầu tư vào một công ty khác. Vậy thì bạn cần phải phân biệt ra là mình đang có một công ty loại nào. Rồi sau đó nữa, đó là cái quy mô phần ở trên đi ha, thì sau đó mình phải đi sâu hơn nữa, là mình xem lại bản thân của mình có những cái kỹ năng nào, hoặc là mình có khả năng để có những kỹ năng nào để mình có thể đi sâu hơn. Bởi vì cho ví dụ công ty của Propsy của anh John là trong ngành bất động sản đi ha, thì khi mình xem tổng quan á, thì tất cả chúng ta đều biết bất động sản là một cái ngành rất là hot ở Việt Nam. Thì nếu mà bạn xem như vậy thì bạn nói tôi muốn làm bất động sản, nhưng bây giờ Linh hỏi lại là bạn có kinh nghiệm gì trong bất động sản, và bạn có thể nói tôi chỉ quan tâm thôi thì cái đó có thể là không đủ. Thì anh John đã mô tả cái quan điểm, cái khái niệm là mình có vừa đủ kinh nghiệm. Tại vì nếu mà mình chưa có đủ thì có thể là mình sẽ không có đủ cái chuyên môn để cho mình nhìn nhận được những cái vấn đề và mình tìm hiểu được những cái cách để giải quyết. Nhưng nếu mà mình có quá nhiều kinh nghiệm thì lúc đó mình đã quen thuộc cái cách làm đó, và mình chỉ quen biết một cách thôi, mình đã tự đánh khung vào một cái phương pháp nào rồi đó, thì rất là khó để cho mình sáng tạo, mình tìm những cái ý tưởng khác. Thì lời khuyên của anh John là bạn ngay khoảng tầm giữa, nghĩa là mình có một vài năm kinh nghiệm, vì trong xuyên suốt những năm đó mình cũng luôn suy nghĩ tổng quan là thế nào để cho mình có thể tạo một cái phương pháp mà thị trường hiện tại chưa có. Thì dần dần mình sẽ có thể tự khởi nghiệp và dùng những cái ý tưởng đó để tạo ra một công ty mới. Nói chung là anh John là một người là khá bận rộn, đã từng khởi nghiệp nhiều lần và cũng có rất nhiều cái sở thích ngoài. Cho Linh hỏi tiếp với các bạn trước khi chúng ta vô cái phần để lời khuyên về cuộc sống cá nhân á, thì cho Linh hỏi với các bạn là bạn có thường lên kế hoạch hàng ngày cho mình không? A là có, B là không, C là thỉnh thoảng. Nghĩa là với bạn là một ngày của bạn nó có tổ chức như thế nào, cái cơ cấu của nó có rõ ràng không, và mỗi ngày bạn có suy nghĩ tổng quan ngay buổi sáng là hôm nay tôi sẽ đạt được bao nhiêu cái mục tiêu gì đó, mình có một cái danh sách. Thì cho Linh hỏi là bạn có hay không. Tại vì cái phần kế tiếp chúng ta sẽ hỏi về anh John, thế nào để anh ấy có thể đạt được tất cả những cái thành đạt của anh ấy trong cuộc sống. Anh ấy có là một người rất là tổ chức hay là một người rất là theo tùy hướng. Thì cho Linh hỏi các bạn trước ha, các bạn nghĩ là bạn sẽ có hay không đây? Để coi trước tiên. B là không. Ủa không hả? sao Linh ngạc nhiên là cũng có một vài người nói là không, rồi có một người có thỉnh thoảng. Ok. Câu trả lời khá đa dạng ha. Thì nói chung là cái này phụ thuộc vào bạn ha, cá tính của bạn và có thể công việc của bạn và mục tiêu của bạn. Thì vậy chúng ta trở vô nói chuyện với anh John ha. Với một người rất là bận rộn thì anh ấy tổ chức một ngày như thế nào? Okay, John. So let's get back to how you organize your days, because it seems like you are a very busy person, and I'd like to know how do you organize your days so that you can get the most done with work, but then also have a little bit of time to yourself. Right? Are there any tips you can share?
I think many people always ask about the work-life balance, right? And I don't think it's a balancing act that you have to do, quite honestly. Maybe this is because you get older and some gray hair, And that experience tells you, there are certain things that you can do at a certain time. When I was very young in my first startup, I'll share that story with you guys. I was a very young guy. I was 28 years old. I didn't know the meaning of sleep. I slept with when I did sleep, the BlackBerry is right here to my left. And so it's vibrating, 3 a.m. in the mornings, and I would respond within minutes because I felt it was something that I had to do. I had to be on 24/7. And as a result of which my car license plate actually said always on, right? So it gives you, literally. So it gives you a sense of how I operated back then, where it was, my schedule was completely flexible. I was always on, always available 24/7, 365. And because you felt that you were running a sprint, right? There was a finish line and you got to get there first. But with the maturity of time and experience of starting up several companies, I started to realize on my own is that, it's actually not a sprint. It's a series of sprints. And so if you sprint everything you've got on that first 100 meters, then you're going to gas out by the second and third. So you've got to really pace yourself, but you have to still operate like a startup, which means you need to be able to burst when needed. But in the meantime, just run a casual pace. And so if you actually look at me at my home gym, I kind of run that way too, to this day. I run at 6, nice casual pace, and then it's cranked up to 18 for a minute to 2. And so as a result of which I translate that to how I run the business and I run my day-to-day routine. I leave my schedule fairly flexible, but everybody can just book it. And then I just make sure that I'm constantly nudged along the way. But at the same time, I need to have those moments where it is just my time. And so there are literally 2 hours blocked out so that I can go play tennis. I can go hit the driving range ball. I'm just going to go stare out the window aimlessly for an hour because that's just part of the process of decompressing, finding your own time to make sure you can think through around all the chaos being in a startup, because it's just a lot of stuff to process in a day.
That's really interesting. So those 2 hours, because I'm trying to think about how do I manage my time. So those 2 hours you're talking about, is that during the work day, or do you have to do it at night? Sorry?
Right. Because my days, actually, my working time is actually very long. So, we still have conference calls, still doing email compositions at 10 p.m. at night, setting everything up for the next day or the following. So for me, I can literally take an hour, 2 hours out of the day just for my own time, but it's not every day. It's maybe 2 days a week or 3 days a week max. But it's an exit valve for me to kind of release and just reflect. And it's not always about reflecting on the current state of the business today, but it's about, where we've been, some of the decisions we made, why did we make those decisions? How does that impact us going forward? What's the direction? What's the plan, et cetera? So it's just free flow, free thought.
I think that's a really good concept. Since we've been at home a lot, sometimes I take an extra half hour at lunch to bake banana bread for the kids, right?
Exactly.
But I still feel guilty because I'm like, oh, I took an hour and a half lunch. Oh my goodness, yeah, and so I think that's a really good point. Is as a person who is on more than the standard number of hours, if you really want to push yourself, then you do need to have that release valve, like you say, right? You can't just be on all the time because then you're just going to burn out.
Exactly.
So when you do take this time off, what do you do? Like, do you meditate? Do you actively do things that kind of help release? Is it a physical release, a mental release? Like, what are some of the things that people
absolutely.
can do?
So, I love playing sports. I've been playing sports since I was a child. So for me, it's just a matter of getting focused on something else. Because if you're like you said, if your brain is always on one topic, you're just going to fry yourself. And so, believe it or not, a lot of the ideation, a lot of the problem solving happens when you're not even thinking about it. And that's the best moment. And if you can realize it's happening and you capture it, it's like having a dream, right? It's an awesome dream. All of a sudden you wake up, it's like, okay, what was that dream? Try to park it. Right. And so it's the same thing with, problem solving. So I find myself being very imaginative because I'm just kind of free floating when I'm doing my own thing, whether that's on the tennis court, trying to compete, or on the golf course when I'm just playing against myself, or just at the driving range, just hitting 100 balls. It's your moment, it's your time, and that's where you may not even be thinking about it, but a solution may come up.
Yeah, that's totally true. Because a lot of times I find I have the best ideas in the shower, but then I'm all wet and I can't write things down.
Fog up the windows.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, well, I think okay. So let's transition a little bit into how does this work for the people that work for you? How about any? What do you do at work, right? How do you help? I mean, okay, so as a manager myself, right? You hope that your team works really hard, but then at the same time you don't want them to burn out. So what is that balance, right? How do you as a manager know how to say, okay, relax, without making sure that the team just like relaxes 5 days a week? You
Right.
know, it goes a little bit too
Especially
far
when
with
you're
that.
paying the bills, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's a tough, it's a challenge, right? For any manager, for any leader of a company, you know, how do you motivate and inspire employees to kind of just put in their best effort? And it's not always measured by the number of hours they sit at the chair, right? Because if you're managing by the seat of the chair, I think that's a very ineffective way to manage. As you can see, you know, my office, the only chair I have is that conference table, but otherwise it looks like a living room. And it's been that way for, I don't know, 20 plus years, right? So every single office I've ever had, it's a living room setup because I want people to feel comfortable. And so if you walk actually out this hall here, again, my office is actually open. Anybody can just sneak up on us. You probably saw a few minutes ago, people just walking back and forth in the middle of a call. So it's an open office, but it goes all the way to the top. And I shared an office, this space with our head of sales, our chief commercial officer, so that ideation conversations just spark. And so same thing for the employees and staff outside. It's, you know, we try to create an environment that fosters, you know, openness, collaboration. If people want to just take a nap, they don't have to nap at their desk, right? Which is something that culturally is a little bit disturbing for me when I first came back. And so we created sleeping pods and sleeping areas. And it's something that you have to want to do from a personal standpoint, not because it's a fad, right? I remember going back to my first startup, for example, you know, we created a spa within our company. And so employees had a little raffle ticket. Everybody was distributed one for twice a week, 20-minute sessions. They just walk into the spa and get a nice head massage, back massage, you know, a little bit of chiropractic action. So these are things that you do because you put yourself into the shoes of your staff and your employees and say, you know, what would you want, right? Would you want to be, you know, have an overseer as a manager, or do you want someone who's going to be your colleague and your co-collaborator? And so if you need time to just walk outside or time to go get a massage, fine. You want to go sleep, fine. As long as the results and the purpose or the objective of the unit, the department, of myself as an individual are very clearly defined, then trust that the process works and you hired the right person. And step away from hiring, you know, overseers and landlords within your company. And then just create the right environment that allows people to, you know, enjoy, relax, collaborate, be creative.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you, John, for all of your insights today. So I'm going to wrap up really quickly with our audience here. Thì trở lại các bạn ơi, thì anh John vừa rồi đã chia sẻ về cái cách để cho mình có thể duy trì cái sự là cái việc là mình làm việc chăm chỉ, mình rất tập trung vào công việc. Nghĩa là trong một ngày anh ấy không phải chỉ làm từ 8 tới 6 giờ tối, có thể là anh ấy mười mấy giờ vẫn còn trên on call với những cái buổi họp online hoặc là vẫn trả lời email. Thì nói chung là với một cái lịch mà nó rất là dài và rất là bận rộn như vậy đó, thì anh ấy cũng dành khoảng tầm 1-2 tiếng một ngày, có thể là 2-3 lần một tuần đi, cho riêng của anh ấy. Nghĩa là có thể là trong giữa ngày anh ấy sẽ dành thời gian để đi chơi tennis hay là để làm một cái việc riêng tư. Và cái điều này nó rất là quan trọng, tại vì nếu mà bạn luôn luôn tập trung vào công việc và mình không có cho một tí giải trí thì có thể là mình sẽ bị quá tải, là mình sẽ không thể sáng tạo, mình sẽ bị hơi quá mệt, thì nói chung là mình sẽ không thể tập trung nữa. Thì với kinh nghiệm của anh John, anh ấy biết là đúng là cái thời điểm làm việc nó không có quan trọng, tại vì phần lớn anh ấy đã không bao giờ làm những cái làm việc theo giờ hành trình không biết là gì, phải không? Là nó từ sáng sớm trước khi mặt trời lên tới tối khuya mà sau khi mặt trời xuống. Thì nói chung là với một người như vậy đó, thì bạn cần phải suy nghĩ là mình cần thời gian riêng tư của mình như thế nào, và buộc phải ép nó vào cái lịch để cho bạn có thời gian để suy nghĩ. Thì hôm nay Linh thấy là rất là thú vị, mình tìm hiểu được từ một người mà khá thành công những cái mẹo để cho bạn có thể khởi nghiệp và sau đó bạn có thể duy trì những cái việc này cho những cái lộ trình lâu dài. Thì Linh rất hy vọng các bạn đã học được nhiều thứ từ anh John, và các bạn hãy chia sẻ, share và like để cho các bạn khác có thể cùng học hỏi từ anh John nha. And thank you, John. Thank you so much for being here today. And we'll talk to you again soon. Và xin hẹn gặp lại các bạn trong chương trình kế tiếp.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.